Hey besties, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Sunshine and Rainbows podcast, the visual version. I'm your host, Manda, and I'm so excited for this episode because it's actually a continuation of episode 2. So episode 2 is actually still the most listened to episode in this series so far, and you're just gonna have to go back and listen to it to understand why. But our guest, Dr. Kim, comes on and explains how she listened to that episode and was moved to reach out and give her own experience from a different side of the story. I hope y'all enjoy and have been enjoying this visual podcasting so far. I've decided that I'm only going to be showcasing the guests because I think personally it's just kind of boring to watch me talk to myself. That's what a podcast is for. You can just listen to me instead of watching me. So this is going to be every other week. That's the style of this podcast so far. Every other week I have a guest on. Let me know if you like that. Let me know. Hit me up in the comment section. All right, let's get into it. Oh my God, I'm so excited to officially meet you. Dr. Kim, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast and being such a supporter. I really appreciate you.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed listening, and it hits close to home. Everything, just between the animal training world and my aspect of the veterinary field and just the animal world itself, it hits close to home. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, this is Dr. Kim. She is a doctor of veterinary medicine, and she listened to my episode about toxicity in the workplace, especially kind of pertaining to my personal experience when it comes to working in the animal training field. Well, she reached out to me and was like, hey, Amanda, it's not just the animal training field. There's a whole other side to it. And she thought she would give a little bit of her perspective, and we're going to branch into a whole new conversation that kind of goes hand in hand with that today. So I am going to turn it over to you. Give me a little background about you, what got you to where you are. Take it away. Take us on a journey.
Oh, it started back when, no. So I work and live in Florida now. So we have that Florida connection. However, I went to school in Ohio at the Ohio State University. Go Buckeyes. So I went there for undergrad and vet school, and I ended up down in Florida to work with horses and do breeding stuff with horses. And that was the name of my game for 5 years. And then I did, have to transition. Part of it because my husband and I moved, and a bunch of that, but also just because I was getting burnt out, and just whatever all of us go through. I think a couple times, I hate to say a couple times, numerous times in our career, and so I switched over to small animal, partly because where we moved, I just was not finding another equine job, even though I was moving to Baltimore, Maryland, which, is horse country. I mean, the Preakness was just run a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
But still, it was being where we lived and everything, it just didn't happen. So I switched over to small animal, surprisingly, actually really liked it. And in the veterinary field, you don't have to specialize, in terms of when you go to school, you don't have to say, I'm going to work with this. Our degree lets us work with everything. And yes, you do train to specialize sometimes, but you don't have to declare it and then you're stuck with it, which is kind of nice.
Oh, that's awesome. That just gives you the freedom and flexibility to evolve, which is awesome.
And that's probably what's kept me with career longevity, to be completely honest. So I worked in a clinic there, and kind of gained my feet in the small animal world, and definitely had a better quality of life because I wasn't on call all the time. And, but I had my daughter then, and things shifted. I was always the person that was saying, I worked too hard for this degree. I'm not going to change anything. I want my daughter to see that I worked hard for this. You can have both things. Mm-hmm. Well, you can, but there's sometimes a price. Mm-hmm. And you do have to, you can't do everything all the time.
Yeah.
And I learned that the hard way. So I did end up leaving my position there. And that was one where, the work environment, I looked away from it a lot. And then the writing was on the wall before I left for my maternity leave.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I came back, it was like, oh, okay, this is how it was. And it seemed like this big shock and everything, but really my priorities had shifted. And also I think just a new set of eyes, and you're just like, oh, this isn't what we're going to do anymore. Okay. And so, and then like that got the ball rolling of us. We moved back to Florida, we're just like, okay, we want to be back here. And I feel like my career has taken so many twists and turns, but I started working relief. So meaning that I was like the substitute teacher of the veterinary world.
Okay.
So I worked in different clinics. It gave me so much flexibility with my schedule, with having, a young daughter.
Probably some awesome variety too.
Yes, which was nice. But, it also let me see a lot of what I did and didn't want in a workplace. There were some places that were amazing. Anytime they asked if I wanted to work or could fill in, I was like, yes, absolutely. There was somewhere I was like, oh shoot, I committed to 5 days of this. Oh man, after day one. And so that's, that toxic work environment where you can already see like almost like an outsider walking in that you're going, oh dear Lord, what did I get myself into? Mm-hmm. And so I ended up last year, of course, during the pandemic, I was covering a maternity leave and this clinic was amazing. And I ended up doing a second maternity leave, like on the tail end of, another pandemic, maternity leave.
Yeah.
And then finally in January, I signed on with them, so so I'm part-time. Through all of these like trials and tribulations and stuff, I found what works for us, what works for my family. And thankfully I've had that luxury. There are definitely colleagues and classmates and everything that don't have that luxury. Mm-hmm. They're tied down to student loans or, just so location dependent, or they're the sole spouse or, the primary breadwinner of the family. I'm not the primary breadwinner of the family. I'm not, I'm fortunate enough that I don't have any student debt. So, and that's huge.
That's
in the veterinary
huge.
world.
That's amazing.
So I'm like, thanks, mom and dad.
Yeah, for real.
Big thank you. And that's one of those things that like when you're in school, you're like, okay, whatever. But then you're like, oh man, that was huge. Thanks.
Yeah.
So that has given me the flexibility, but I can tell you what, it's not, I don't even want to say it's like a success story because it's not. It's just that I've had to cope. I've had to adapt and gotten to a place where things work. And it's been weird because, I still, part of me coping and adapting is having a side business that involves Disney. Come on,
but it's amazing. I love that.
It is. I love it. But, it's one of those things, if you would have told me that, like when I graduated, from vet school, I'd be like, what are you smoking?
Mm-hmm.
But that's where we're at. And, but it's taken, oh God, it's taken burnout. It's taken realizing compassion fatigue and what that is and what that entails to get to that point. And then, finally getting into a spot mentally and, just with support system to realizing like what works, what symptom, what are my triggers? What if I sign up for X, Y, and Z, I know I have to take like 5 days after, stuff like that. Like where you're like, okay, this is going to be a tough week, so let's not plan anything for the weekend, so it's just taken a lot of time to get to that point.
Yeah. Well, that actually brings us perfectly to our topic today. Thank you so much for sharing about your journey and just really just humanizing you. And I love that because you shared not only that you have this incredible degree and you're incredibly smart and successful in achieving that, because so many people start out as a little kid and say they want to do that, but few people actually do it. And you did it, and that's amazing. But just giving that perspective that you still achieved that, but it's still hard and you're still working every single day to get through some of the things that you experience that are on like the not so cool side of your field. So for anyone who doesn't know, compassion fatigue is defined as a condition where an individual gradually becomes less compassionate towards a certain medical or social circumstance. This is usually caused by repeated exposure to suffering or pain over a period of time, which is common amongst care workers and other health professionals. So you talked about some of your triggers and some symptoms of compassion fatigue. And I actually looked it up on the internet, and it says that some symptoms can include a decreased ability or inability to experience pleasure. That sucks. Anxiety, sleeplessness, hopelessness, and pessimism. Professionally, this can manifest as reduced productivity, reduced self-confidence, and self-awareness, and a decrease in quality standards, which is huge when you're thinking about if this is affecting a lot of healthcare and medical workers, like reducing quality standards. That's like,
Yeah, it definitely can be huge. And I mean, I know the obvious elephant in the room, for the compassion fatigue, is euthanasia.
Yeah.
And it's something that we have to do. And I always have clients say like, oh, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I couldn't do that. I was just like, and I hate to say, I have my canned answer of like, well, I have to look at this as this is something we can give them, and this is something we can do. And it's true. I mean, like, we can go down a whole another path with that, but really, sometimes that's not even the most draining thing. Seeing an animal come in that you can tell that someone just hasn't cared, that, or having to explain to someone, break the bad news, or, seeing like the young 5-year-old animal that, it's not easier when they're old, but your brain can rationalize it better.
Right.
But you see the 4-year-old happy Labrador retriever, like looking at you, and you're just like having to be like, you have cancer. That sucks. That pulls at your heartstrings. Those are the days when you go home and, there's a pint of ice cream and, sometimes a glass of wine and a whole bunch of Office reruns, because my brain cannot process anything else.
So that's what I've been reading, is that people whose professions lead to this prolonged exposure of either other people's trauma or in your case, animals' trauma, you can be vulnerable to what's called vicarious trauma. So you experience the acute symptoms that put their physical and mental health at risk. You experience, so it's that empathy of already being in that caregiving role. And so you can have like secondhand PTSD from the trauma that you're witnessing over and over.
And you can. And, there's days where, you have that case that comes in and you're just like, I couldn't help it. I couldn't do anything for it, whether they're crashing and burning in front of you, or sometimes it's just that constant like poking and nagging, like the low grade, but still always present. And it definitely, and then, pairing with it, I'm an introvert. I don't thrive on being, I can socially function, obviously, right. But I don't gain energy off of being around people all day. And I think a lot of animal care professionals are like that. We didn't get into the field because, yes, we want to care for animals, but I could have been a human doctor probably. I don't know. But I don't like sick people. But, a lot of us forget that with every animal is a human attached to it, an owner. So, by the time I drain my cup, from talking to people all day, and then add on to it, compassion fatigue. I know a lot of people call it empathy fatigue. Whatever you want to call it. You get a little empty shell of a person some days. And, I hate to say, some days I come home and, like my daughter wants to like, mommy's home, you want to play and everything. And, those are some tough parenting days. And, or even before I had a kid, that's some tough, just relationship days. I mean, my husband realized pretty soon that some days, like he kind of could know when it was just like, I just need some time. I just need a little bit of time to, decompress. And
Kevin's thing was, he was always like, I didn't know what version of Amanda I was going to get walking through the door. And he's like, you would call me on your way home, but I knew that in that 15-minute window, your mood could change for the better, for the worse. So even though you were one way on the phone, after you were processing alone in the car on the way home, you could be a whole different person walking through the door. And I didn't know if I needed to do like recon or like duck and cover or help you. He's like, I just kind of tiptoed around you until I realized like, okay, what is our night gonna look like?
Yeah.
And that broke my heart, honestly, hearing that.
Absolutely. And, and there's some days like after bedtime, like for my daughter, I'll just be like, oh my gosh, I messed that one up, and there's days like that. And fortunately, it's days, versus like all the time, and I do know, like right now my schedule, like I work 2 days, like I work Thursdays and Fridays and like every few Saturdays. And in that time period, like I am drained, but my, weekend is usually family time. And then, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's never a day off, but it's, like Mondays, I like to do things where I have no people involved, so if it's household chores, if it's, like stuff like my brain needs that, so, and that's, kind of like my coping, my way to fill up my cup, and stuff like that. But like, I didn't always do that. I was sometimes just go, and didn't see that in myself, that I needed that time. And, that's when I would get burnt out. That's when, and you're talking about when your production goes down, not even production, but your quality of work goes down. And it's not that we all make mistakes, it happens, but, luckily we have a system in place, in most clinics where it's like someone's double checking, like your prescription and, stuff like that. Like there's multiple eyes looking at that. But, sometimes there are, those mistakes. Like my assistant will be like, did you mean to only prescribe them one pill? No. And that's, usually when you're just like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the day. And, and it's not been all, happy puppy and kitten visits. And, like, that's what everyone's like, oh, you need to play with puppies and kittens all day. It's like, those are few and far between. And you best believe that whenever a puppy enters the building, we're all like, yay, puppy. And we try to take it in back, for socialization, quote, but it's usually let everyone get some snuggles. Cause we got to fill up the cup. We got to, just keep, and that's something that I preach, with everyone. It's like, okay, fill up your cup. You can't pour from an empty cup.
No.
And when you try, that's when things crash and burn. So.
And I think that's such a testament to, like you said, identifying your triggers, setting your limits, just being mindful of your own needs, because I relate it to when you're on an airplane and they say, put on your oxygen mask before helping the person next to you. It's that same thing. You have to take care of you before you can even begin to expect to take care of anyone else in your life. Whether it's people at your job, your friends, your spouse, your family, you got to take care of you first.
Yeah. And that has taken a while, even as a parent, for me to realize, like, I used to feel guilty, and sometimes I do still feel guilty. Like last week I was running to Orlando to do errands, and I ended up at Magic Kingdom for 3 hours. Oops. I mean,
Floridian problems.
But I needed that.
Yeah.
And that's where weird, just like where life has taken weird turns and, and everything like that. But, that's been one of my releases and my, reprieve is just, having that happy place, or, having the other work and the other things that, not that they don't have their own stresses inherently, but it's different. honestly, nobody's, when I'm helping someone plan their Disney vacation, like as my side job,
Yeah.
there's not life and death involved in it. It's,
Yep.
oh shoot, we didn't get that dining reservation. Okay, we're going to keep trying, but,
Right.
and I mean, I still take it very seriously, but it's a whole different magnitude, compared to the day job.
And that's what I think too is hard. What I'm finding with talking to people, especially in the animal realm, is we just associate our job with our purpose, with our identity. It's all just jumbled into one, where, like you said, with your side business, you're like, oh, I can disassociate that and be like, oh, didn't get that dining reservation. I'm not going to sit at home and think about it and lie awake at night, but there's a difference. And it's something about working with animals and potentially other people in healthcare professions too. You just emulate that.
You do. And it's a lot harder to shut that off. And, in the veterinary field, we call it vet brain. Like some nights I cannot shut the vet brain off, like when I used to do surgeries, they caused massive anxiety for me. I was a fine surgeon. I did fine. By no means was I doing advanced orthopedic surgery or anything of that sort. But, a simple spay and neuter would have me lay awake at night. Like, are they going to be okay? Are they going to, like just stuff like that where,
yeah.
And that's not every person. That was just me, and that was my brain, because it was something that, I don't know. As a already anxious person, it's just like, oh, and so when I just decided I wasn't going to do surgery anymore, and when I went into doing relief, I just didn't provide that service. And the clinic I'm at now, they're like, no, we need people in exam rooms. Great. I don't want to do surgery anymore. And, they were like, do you want to? Nope. It was too much of a source of anxiety. I mean, did I ever have a patient with a surgical complication? Nope. But my brain didn't know that. As I was laying awake at 2 a.m. wondering whether or not, my patient's okay. And I mean, I still get that, for like a really sick patient that I had come in, or, I still wonder until, like the next morning when I give them a call. And, it is still hard some nights to turn off the brain, but it's a lot, you just cater it and carve it and, make things what works for you. And like I said, fortunately, I've had that luxury. Some people don't, and we've definitely, as a profession, had to, I don't know, the veterinary field used to be all men. And I'd say like mid or late 80s, early 90s, it was like half and half, and then now it's mostly women, but we joke around that there's a boys club sometimes. And because the older generation that is in a lot of the leadership positions, or owning a lot of the clinics, are men. And that's, I don't want to say it's wrong, it's not, it's just, that's just how the profession has shifted. But keeping in mind also that a lot of these men had wives at home that took care of the kids, and it didn't matter how late they were working. And so then they have a hard time wondering, like, why do you want to, be off for this X, Y, and Z? And, I know. And luckily I have been fortunate enough not to be in a position where that has come into play, but I have plenty of colleagues where that's, not the case. And, even some of my colleagues here, they're like, well, yeah, I don't have to worry about what time I get home because I have someone that is at home. For me, I'm just looking at the clock sometimes going, okay, I have to leave by this time, especially if my husband's away, he travels for work sometimes. And I have to be like, okay, guys, I have to be out of the door at 5. Right. And in a hospital setting, that sometimes means
impossible.
Yeah, like, I mean, I hate to say I have, gone and picked up my kid from school and brought her back, because I have to, finish X, Y, and Z, and like I said, luckily I'm in a position where there is that flexibility, there is that, responsiveness to it. But it's not always, it's not that way for everyone. And so, people are like, oh, why is this change? And you still sometimes will have the good old boy that's like, I work till midnight every night. When I was starting out, why can't you do it? It's like, because quite frankly, I don't want to.
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to is, again, like setting those limits of when you're able to function as the perfect version of you. And everyone has those different limits and it looks different for everyone, but being mindful enough about yourself and what you personally need, and then having the coworkers and the infrastructure to respect that. It's all the same. It all goes hand in hand.
It all goes hand in hand. And, having the toxic work environment where it's, no, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? You should be able to do this. And, you get yourself out of there. I mean, some people can function that way. I couldn't. I couldn't.
Neither, girl. Neither, girl. I get you. And it was hard because for me, I really had to grapple with, this is something I've wanted to do my entire life. And I love everything about what I'm doing, but I don't love the person I'm becoming. And it was really hard to start separating Manda from the toxicity. And I knew that I had to walk away. And that was a very hard decision that I had to make. But looking back, again, it's been 5 months. I would have told myself to do it sooner. Now, knowing the person that I've become just in 5 months, and while it's sad and I miss those animals, I wouldn't change any experience up until now. So,
No, and that's, I was thinking about this the other day when my husband and I have been married for 10 years. So when we did marriage counseling, with Pastor, I remember now, like him saying to my husband, she's stressed. It was all based on like a questionnaire we had to take individually. And then, like she ranks high on stress. That's something we're going to have to manage. And then like, what was that? That was probably 9 months later, I was leaving my first position.
Wow.
And I was just like, and there were other factors to it, but even my husband said that, the night, of course, you're anxious when you're going to turn in your resignation and, all of that. And he said like the night after I did, or even the night after I made the decision that I was going to leave, I slept sound.
Wow.
Like that was enough, of what was causing so much stress. And, in a lot of professions, there's so many people in it that it's not a small world. Like in the animal world, it's a small world. Like I put in my resignation at noon, so I live on the East Coast of Florida, drove to Bradenton, so on the West Coast.
On the West Coast.
For continuing education. So 3 hours. I sat down, to sit down for the lecture for my continuing ed. And the doctor that was running it sits down. Is like, so I hear you just left your position today. I mean, I'm like, what?
Yikes.
Here I was having like the most freeing 3 hours of my, my recent career and everything. And like I said, it's not even that where I was working was a terrible environment.
Right.
It was just, we were thinking about moving. We were, I was burnt out,
Yeah. And you just needed a break. And
yeah. And
then people should understand that.
I was like, what? And, I, of course, had my PC, answer. And, in hindsight, 10 years later, Kim is like, nah, you probably should have been a little bit more honest about things. But I still, like I said, small world. And not, like I said, I would never tell someone not to go work for that clinic.
Yeah, exactly.
They do an amazing job. They do amazing, work. It just wasn't working for me
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets easier to set boundaries, you know, as you get along with like that first job, and even that second job. Like second job, I was transitioning from, you know, one aspect of the field to another, and I felt like, oh, I could never find something else. This is the first place that would take me, that would like mentor me.
Nah.
I mean, nah, it wasn't that big of a deal, you know.
So with that, all of that being said, and all of the incredible things you have shared, what is your advice to say there's a compassion fatigued veterinarian or vet tech listening to this right now, someone who wants to grow up to be a mover and shaker in this field? What is some advice or tips that you can give them that at least have personally worked for you? Because as we say with, you know, this podcast, life is not all sunshine and rainbows. And on our social media, it definitely looks that way. But we're here to start conversations about things that, you know, maybe give you some goosebumps or make your palms a little sweaty. And that's definitely something that we've been talking about today. So what's your advice for anyone?
Set boundaries and be firm in them. I mean, now I know what I can do. I know what works for our family. Like say, I mean, I'm part-time right now. I can work full-time for like a month or so. But then after that, we have to, you know, that just knowing how you function best, but then above all else, don't hesitate to put yourself first. Don't hesitate to put your family first, because you're the only one that's going to do that. Mm-hmm. You're the only one that's going to have your back. Now that doesn't mean don't be a team player, don't be, you know,
right.
and all of that, but because there's definitely some people that are not that, you know, in this world, but you have to watch out for yourself. And that even sounds bad. But you have to, you know, be your own advocate, you know, be your own cheerleader, and, you know, make sure that you are doing what is going to keep yourself sane, keep yourself just in a good mindset, you know. So if that means knowing that you have to have X amount of time off in between, you know, X amount of days, if it's, you know, hey, you're pulling a shift for someone else, okay, you need to, you know, I need someone to help me out too. Yeah. And even just knowing your things to refill your cup, you know. For me, it's, you know, Disney, spending time with my family, you know, which goes hand in hand a lot, you know, just having that time to be alone. You know, my little tiny plant babies that are all, you know, growing and everything. But you have to make that system and that support system. And if you want longevity, you know, you gotta make your little bubble where you can make yourself, you know, comfortable and just be there. So
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim, for sharing. And it's so great officially meeting you. Yeah. I have been a big fan of yours for a while. You're always so sweet and just a bundle of joy every time you find yourself in my inbox. And I love it. So I appreciate you. I do want to give you a chance just to share where people can find you if they want to, you know, share with you that you impacted them, or maybe start the conversation a little bit further. So if you'd like to share any of your social channels or your side biz that you have too, I'll give you the space to do that.
So I guess I never really said like side biz. I do, you know, like vacation planning, Disney planning. So that's kind of been our release, you know, and the, something other than the vet world. But on Instagram, that's mainly where I'm at. I'm at happiest.haigs, HAIGS.on.earth. So
yes, and I will link all of that in the episode notes too, so that way people can go down to the bottom and click directly to that.
Awesome.
Yay. Well, thank you so much again. This was a pleasure, and I think a conversation that I enjoyed having, and just learning more about your side of the field and just getting that extra perspective on things that we've kind of already talked about. So
thanks. It was great. I love it.
I feel like I say this every single episode, but what a conversation. Honestly, I'm so grateful to Dr. Kim for sharing her side of the story, telling us about compassion fatigue, burnout, and just giving us some insight on what it's like to be a veterinarian. I had such a good time talking to her, and this has been incredible, not only to be able to share my experiences, but to get to share in other people's experiences. As we both talked about, being a better human and taking care of yourself mentally rolls over into the physical aspects as well too. Again, I'm honored to have Dr. Kim, and I cannot wait for our next guest to be on. I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.